A little bit of history of not only the present windows and the historic windows. Originally, most of the windows that we're working with are double hung windows, double and single hung. And originally the double and single hung window was developed in 1669. So they've been around almost 300 years. They were the very first one of record was in the Queen's bath chamber. And then following that, and for the first 80 years or so, they were all single hungs. Only the lower sash slid up and down, but they were still a hung window. Prior to the hung windows, casements were popular. Going back to medieval times, they were sometimes made out of cast iron or wrought iron and glass put in them, and they would swing in or they would swing out. Then they were made out of wood. But as I say, in 1669, the hung window became popular. And it followed the migration to the United States. So our very earliest windows generally in this country, going back to the 1600s, back to the 1700s, were double and single hung windows. The pulley systems came into being about the same time that the double hung came into being, around 1780, 1790. And since that time, the pulleys that are used have been the standard operation until the last 50 years or so. There is no better operation in a window than a rope and pulley system or a chain and pulley. They will be around until the building collapses, pretty much. The weights will. When the building collapses, the weights that are used will be picked up for boat anchors. The old windows in your building, this was the design. This goes back in behind your plaster, this pocket. That's where the weight and the pulley is. And it's what they call a cased box frame. You have a box frame as opposed to a single frame like this. And with the cased box frame, this is your casing, your plaster's back behind here, and the sash slides up and down within the track. It's a much more difficult type of frame to make than what they call a plank frame. As I say, like this is, just a single piece of wood. As a result, they're a much more expensive window. And what you buy today is going to be a frame like this or like this. It just slips in to your existing window. Or in a new house, this is all you have left. It's just this kind of a frame right here when you buy it. This would be a typical new window. Because the cased box frame was such an expensive item to build, back about 1895, the Pullman manufacturing company manufactured a pulley mechanism that wasn't really a chain, and it wasn't really a chain and pulley. In fact, really, you can even call it a pulley. It was this sort of a thing that had a tape on it. And these have been around well over 100 years. They've served their function pretty well. They're nothing as good as a rope and pulley, but these are as close as you're going to come to it. And with this sort of a mechanism, you also seal up the pocket, the hole that is in the frame itself where the pulley goes through. So it has a good use, and these have, as I say, they've functioned for well over 100 years right now. This pulley here is over 100 years old, ball bearing, with a chain. This is solid bronze, and you get solid brass or brass plated. The solid ones are better. Or a rope. This, as I mentioned at the beginning, will probably last your lifetime. The ropes typically will give you 50 to 60 years of wear. The chains, depending on the size of the sash, according to a study made at MIT back in 1896, I think it was, they did a test where they cycled the window up and down 10,000 times to see which method would last the longest, a chain or a rope. The rope outlasted the chain typically because there's no links that can break off. And the chain will give you probably, in a typical smaller window, you'll probably get 80, 90 years of life out of a chain, maybe even more than that. And the rope, you're going to get 50 to 60 years of wear minimally. The sashes in a typical existing window is a sash made like this. It's a Mortise and Tenon. If for those of you who are not familiar with mortise and tenon joinery, this is your mortise. It's the hole that goes in. This is the tenon that slips into it. That also is a very expensive system. None of today's new windows, except your custom houses, but when you look at the major manufacturers that you can buy from Lowe's or Menards or who have their own companies, local retailers set up, none of them use this. They're all using a system like this, what they call a slot mortise. It doesn't have nearly the strength that a mortise and tenon has. You'll seldom ever see one of these pull apart. And it's even more critical today because when this was designed, this type of a window sash was designed, it was designed for single glass. Today, the new windows are designed for insulated glass, which is 2 lights. So the weight on the sash is double what it was originally. And when you add that double weight to this kind of construction, you have a window that's doomed to failure in maybe less than 10 years. The joinery can be a closed pocket like this is. It doesn't go through. It's a little shorter tenon and of equal value and quality is one like this where the tenon goes all the way through the pocket. It's a little bit longer and goes all the way through. This is a sash rail, a bottom rail, different than most. It's a very steep one. We did these for the Mark Hopkins Hotel in San Francisco. And we also made it so that it had a mechanism where the sash could be pivoted around, a mechanism that dates back to 1905, 1904 actually. This stop right here is probably the most important part of the window. It's a very small piece of material, but it's what keeps the sashes in position. And when this is properly sealed, it's what seals off and weatherproofs the window. And it makes it so the sash cannot blow out. This sort of a window right here, the sort that tilts, and this is better than what the latest ones are. This right here, there's nothing holding the sash in, and if you notice, the sash is smaller than the frame, the wood opening. So when this fails, you can't even reuse the sash if you can't buy the jam liners, and some of them have been discontinued. They're no longer available. So this little piece of wood right here makes the whole difference. Windows that do not have this, you're going to have a major choice and chance of those windows loosening up and failing in a very short time. This is a 70-year-old window. I was driving down the streets in Kalamazoo one weekend when they had the garbage and the junk pickup, and my lights flashed on something shiny, and it happened to be the pulley in the window. And I pulled over, and it was just the size I'd been looking for because the full-size windows are a little awkward to carry. This was more easily handled, so I dumped it in my van. We took it back and restored it. We get into it and find that that was an original Anderson window from the 1940s. They don't make them like that anymore. Nobody does. It had the rope and pulley. We restored it and operates like brand new. Now, it's all weather stripped. And the exterior of it, a storm window's been put on, if you want to turn that around here, John. Oh, before we do that, John, you want to show them where the pocket is in the window?
Your pockets are always in your windows right in here. Once you pull your inside stop, screw that, you have a pocket probably about that long. And you just take one screw out the top, it just slides up underneath, and that's where your weights and all your counterbalances are inside your pocket.
Put a storm window on here. This is one that's designed for historic work. It's a flush face so that it looks almost like a wood storm window does, and yet it operates, slides up and down. And it's the only window we've found in an aluminum storm window that looks like a wood storm window, and yet you have the advantage of not having to take it up and down.